Well, if you know anything about the RMAC, or if you know anything about RMAC track and field, then you definitely know the Adams State track and field teams are just legendary. In 1990, though, it was a first. The first national title in the sport of men's track and field. 2 years later, they did it again. Here's a look at those two legendary teams from Adams State.
To RMAC Hall of Fame, class of 2013.
Accepting on behalf of those two national championship teams is a national champion, the winner of the mile and the 2-mile run, Dan Maas, and we also would like to invite any other members of those teams to please come up and receive that award with him.
As I welcome my teammates, I guess we have two teams, so we get 5 minutes each team, right? Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the 1990 and 92 Adams State men's indoor track teams. There can be no higher honor for any person to be remembered. And so on behalf of our team, we wish to express our deep appreciation to the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference for inducting our teams into the hall tonight. Also, it is important to state right up front that each of us who performed on those teams had great support from our families, our friends, our coaches, our school, and our community. We could not have achieved without the support of that tremendous network of people. My wife, Lon, and son, Calvin, are here tonight. Calvin's running for Adams State. And so let me say thanks, as I know each member of the team would wish their loved ones to be recognized as well. On the occasion of this remembrance of our teams of more than 20 years ago, I would like to relate a few memories of those amazing times. It should be understood that we did not expect to win the 1990 national championship. For Adams State, predominantly a distance running team, track was a time for individual performances. Team scores at track meets were something of a punchline for us, as it was common for the sprinting powerhouses like Prairie View, Azusa Pacific, and Wayland Baptist to amass 50 or more points before we even ran our first event. We must certainly note that our winning total of 58 points means that the usual sprint clubs split up their events pretty evenly, opening the door for us. It happened in the space of just 3 hours, beginning with our great distance champion, Rick Roberts, who won the 3-mile. He had won over and over in cross country and in 10K outdoors, but that tiny track and just 3 miles made it hard for Rick's long strides to pull away, but he did, and we were thrilled for him. And shortly after, Martin Johns won his half-mile, and I followed with the mile, and we took All-American awards throughout. Such that Brian Blazek ran up and told us that if we won the distance medley, something we'd never done, we could win the national championship. We did, and that night, during our celebration, we heard that the wrestlers had won their national championship that same night. Well, you can imagine the lengths we went to celebrate such a special result. On our way home, I recall what is now for me an infamous event in my career at Adams State. You see, we all sat in the back of the Spud bus. The younger athletes, like Peter, asked us, All-Americans and national champions, about our backgrounds. We held court and told our stories. I was eventually asked about my motivation to race, and I told them that I was reluctant to share, but I let them draw it from me. I told them how I had a duck as a pet when I was a child, because we could not afford a dog. A neighbor had given it to me, and one day, when I was just 7 years old, home alone, the duck ran away and got run over by a car. I picked up that duck and saw him still to be alive. Without thinking, I began to run. The vet was 6 miles away on the outskirts of town. I ran, and as I got tired, I looked at my duck, and his eyes seemed to plead with me. I would tell myself, do it for the duck. You remember this, don't you, Pete? Well, I ran and made it to the vet. They took the duck and they saved him. They told me that if I had been any later, my duck would have died. And it was then that I knew I could run. And when I'm racing, in the heat of that toughest moment, I often think to myself, do it for the duck. So what I did not share in this story, Pete, I'm sorry, is the very important fact that my story was a complete fiction. But 2 years later, at the 1992 RMAC conference meet, I was running in a close race and nearing the last lap when I saw the women's team had lined up along the curve and began to clap as I approached. But instead of the usual ASC, ASC, I heard, "Do it for the duck, do it for the duck." I'm sorry to say I'm not making this up. After the race, I confronted the ladies that had chanted and asked why they were making jokes during my race. Looks of surprise and dismay swept across their faces. They explained that for the past 2 years, they had been sharing my secret story about the duck with everyone on the team with the careful warning not to say anything to me about it because I was very sensitive about my duck. So I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly apologize for telling that duck story back in 1990 and for telling it again here tonight. And while 1990 was a complete surprise, 92 was one with intention. We had lost Bird, but Jason Moore, Shane Healy, and Peter De La Cerda and others had matured to fill the gap, and we earned more points than before and vanquished Lubbock Christian, the team that had ended our string of 7 straight cross-country national titles. They had repeated our feat in 1991, winning with distance runners, and as the RMAC was headed out of the NAIA into D2, we felt it critical to defeat Lubbock before we left. And by the end of the meet, we had beaten them at every turn, but our points only put us into second place. It looked like it would be a moral victory for us until we heard that Kevin Cunningham hadn't missed a height in the high jump. We huddled around him because anything less than a national title for Kevin would leave us short in the final score. But Kevin kept clearing that bar. He cleared 6'11", and I think he did tackle 7'1", and he won the title, and he sealed it for Adams State. Friends, I could talk on and on about these teams. The stories and courage are inspiring and joyous for those of us who love the sport. It is sufficient for you to know that such a group of individual champions learned to run for each other and not just for themselves. I'd have gladly coughed up a lung running for the front rather than let these guys down. I know they felt the same. That is why it is so humbling for me to speak for them tonight, and that is why I shall forever be proud to say that I ran for Adams State.